Blackfive.net was started after about June of 2003. On Memorial Day in 2003, one of my best friends was leading a convoy. His name's Matthew Schramm. Was leading a convoy for the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, and was ambushed. And if you ever know, anybody in the room ever knew Matt, he did everything right, always. And it was one of the things as a sort of a peer that you'd want to hate about the guy, but never could because he was such a nice guy. Did everything right. So during this, he was leading this convoy, and it wasn't his troops, but he did everything right. He turned his vehicle into the ambush and was returning fire, and took 2 bullets through his armpit where there's no body armor coverage, and died. But he did what he set out to do, which is break up the ambush and save everybody else in the convoy. It was at his funeral that I learned that there was a reporter from a major newsweekly magazine in that convoy, and the reporter never wrote a story about my friend Matt. And having been in the military, especially, I was trained by the Vietnam vets, that generation. I came in the Army in the early 80s, and I was going through the Special Operations pipeline when my sergeant major one time told me, "Don't let them do to you what they did to us." And at the time I sort of understood what he meant, but I didn't really get it until I was watching it happen to my friends. My peers are now sergeant majors and battalion commanders. And so I was incensed, angry, and I didn't know what to do. So I started a blog and started telling the stories that I thought the media wasn't going to tell, and somebody asked a great question about that. And so one of the most popular parts of Blackfive, which now has 13.5 million readers, was something called Someone You Should Know, and it tells the stories that I get emails from the front, I get stories from people that came back from the war zone, and we tell those stories that you might not read in the mainstream media. And the other thing we do is we try to tell the stories of the wounded troops in Walter Reed. Matter of fact, on the visit, when I go to visit Walter Reed, when I met Chuck, I met a guy named Sergio Lopez, who's from Chicago. I'm a Chicagoan. And so I went to go visit Sergio, and at that day I was in his room. Sergio had to make a decision on whether or not to have both his feet amputated or not. And he made a decision that if he had the amputations done, he'd be able to chase his little girl around in their backyard. And that's what he did. And nobody told that story. And so I did. And so that's what Blackfive really wanted to do, was tell those stories that nobody tells. I will also tell you that I get into the business of taking on the media every day. Just last 2 weeks, we've had a reporter from Rolling Stone embedded with the enemy, with the Taliban. And we had a reporter for the Daily Telegraph in London basically disparage our troops as he was medevaced for no wounds because he was scared out of an ambush situation.
A urine stain on your pants is not a wound.
Yeah. And so, we routinely point those things out. So what we do is we not only work to debunk some of the mischaracterizations of our troops, but we also work at getting these guys fired if they're incompetent. And so we've been working with the Telegraph on that, and I hope any day to hear an announcement that Nick Mio is not going to be working for the Daily Telegraph anymore. And the problem is within the military structure, you can't, the PAO, the public affairs officers, their job's to work with them. I'm out. I used to be a major. I can say whatever I want, and I'll wear it on my sleeve, and I don't apologize for it. And so I have the unique ability to speak for those who can't speak for themselves. And I take that as an honor and a duty. Our soldiers, when they first got into the war zone, for somebody like me that will republish what they send me and keep them anonymous, and I'm worried about OPSEC and things like that. We constantly worry about making sure that we're not going to get somebody killed with what we publish. But one of the things I think that's key in understanding is these soldiers that started going into the war zone in 2003, they're from the generation, the Nintendo generation. So they're bringing cameras, laptops, and internet access started opening up really quick. And so basically these soldiers have the same tools as the media. So it gives us the same, my blog will never have the same voice or the same audience that the New York Times does. But we can make a difference, and I think that's where that's the big difference. It's something Chuck. 20 years ago, we would not have had an effect at all, and now instead we're raising millions of dollars for wounded troops. We're correcting media stories, and we're doing a lot of other things, and we're keeping some things honest. When some guy shows up at an anti-war rally and he looks like a Soviet general, and we can point out the fact that he's probably not what he says he is, and the media does pay attention. I never thought I would be on Fox or CNN or MSNBC talking about those issues. I didn't want to be that guy. It just turns out that, you know, we've had the tools and the voice and had the opportunity to do so. It's been pointed out, I mean, one of the things that I would never want you to take away is that we think all the media is bad or all reporters are bad. I've had the pleasure of working with some very fair people. Actually, I get the fairest shake. Every time on NPR, I get probably the fairest deal of any news agency. So, I mean, you know, it runs the gamut. There are producers that will tell me, gosh, I wish my editor would run this story, but they won't let me because it's pro-American or it's too propagandistic for our side. Which means we won a battle, and they just don't want to show it. So, you know, there's those things. On the day Saddam Hussein was captured, there was a company called Charlie Company, the 1st of the 26th Infantry, probably fought one of the most ferocious, harrowing running gun battles that I've ever heard of, but you'll never hear of it. That unit has suffered as they had fought like hell for almost a year in one of the worst neighborhoods, and never got to tell their story. And as they came home, you know, they're disheartened. It's hard for them to deal, and they're not in it. You know, they're not in it for the glory, but for crying out loud, when you fought like that and given it your all, and there's very little recognition, there problems occur. So what we try to do is make sure we talk to them. So, you know, this Nick Mio story, where the guy's from the Daily Telegraph, it's literally 6 hours after he publishes his story about how he was almost killed by the Taliban that the medics that talk to him are emailing me from Afghanistan telling me what really happened. So that is a huge advantage for our side. And I just got to tell you, if there's any medics in here, I'll buy you a beer. You guys rock. I was a former grunt. I love medics. But if you piss off a medic, you've probably done something really bad. You really have. They love people.
Medics have the best drugs, too.
And they have great drugs. But the honest reason is, you know, now they have the tools to fight back. And I can't tell you their names because they'll get in trouble. But they will try. Lieutenants, captains, colonels, majors, sergeant majors, everybody will try to let us know what the real story is in a certain way, and we'll get the message and try to correct it as much as we can. Well, what's happening right now with new media, and the beauty of new media, whatever you take away from this, is it's distributed. So that means that if I need help on a story, I put a note on my blog saying, hey, I need somebody in the Diyala province that was an engineer that was blowing up IEDs because I need to figure out if this is accurate or not. And I'll get a response. We'll be able to work on that. That means that my blog can then multiply its effect because I can reach out to a lot of resources. Now, what's happening right now with blogs is there's an interesting story in Wired in this month's issue about how blogging's done. And the reason it's done is because journalists have figured out that's the way to go, and they've sort of taken it over. There's a lot of corporate blogs now that get more attention because it's not an individual voice. If you go to Blackfive, we're not writing a fair and balanced story. We're talking from the soldier's perspective, and we're not sorry that we want to freaking win. We want to win, and we're not going to accept defeat, and that's just the way it is. And I think the way journalism is going is a lot of the newspapers are losing subscriptions, they're losing advertisers, and there's a lot of advertisers that are now coming over to blogs. But that the fact that people are starting to figure out that blogging is the way to go, you have a lot of corporations moving into blogging, journalists that are blogging, and things like that. I would encourage everybody to pay attention to Michael Yan, Michael Totten, Bill Roggio, and the folks that are independent journalists that are supported purely by donations to go live in a war zone. Mike Yan will spend years in Iraq. Comes home maybe once a year because he can't afford it, but he'll stay there as long as he can, as long as he gets donations, and he'll tell you the truth straight up, neat, no ice. And I think it's important to pay attention to them, but there's definitely a movement out there to, number one, discredit bloggers like us, and because we're moving into that space.